Section 2. And he it further enacted that the right of way through the public lands be, and the same is hereby, granted to said company for the construction of said railroad and telegraph line. And the right, power, and authority is hereby given to said company to take from the public lands adjacent to the line of said road, earth, stone, timber, and other materials, for the construction thereof. Said right of way is granted to said railroad to the extent of 200 feet in width on each side of said railroad, where it may pass over the public lands, including all necessary grounds for stations, buildings, workshops, and depots, machine shops, switches, side tracks, turntables, and water stations. The United States shall extinguish as rapidly as may be the Indian titles to all lands falling under the operation of this act, and required for the said right of way and grants hereinafter made. Section 3. And be it further enacted that there be, and is hereby, granted to the said company for the purpose of aiding in the construction of said railroad and telegraph line, and to secure the safe and speedy transportation of the mails, troops, munitions of war, and public stores thereon, every alternate section of public land, designated by odd numbers, to the amount of 5 alternate sections per mile on each side of said railroad, on the line thereof, and within the limits often miles on each side of said road. Not sold, reserved, or otherwise disposed of by the United States, and to which a preemption or homestead claim may not have attached at the time the line of said road is definitely fixed, provided that all mineral lands shall be excepted from the operation of this act, but where the same shall contain timber, the timber thereon is hereby granted to said company. And all such lands, so granted by the section, which shall not be sold or disposed of by said company within 3 years after the entire road shall have been completed, shall be subject to settlement and preemption, like other lands, at a price not exceeding $1.25 per acre, to be paid to said company. Section 4. And be it further enacted that, whenever said company shall have completed 40 consecutive miles of any portion of said railroad and telegraph line, ready for the service contemplated by this act, and supplied with all necessary drains, culverts, viaducts, crossings, sidings, bridges, turnouts, watering places, depots, equipments, furniture, and all other appurtenances of a first-class railroad, the rails, and all the other iron used in the construction and equipment of said road, to be American manufacture of the best quality. The President of the United States shall appoint 3 commissioners to examine the same and report to him in relation thereto, and if it shall appear to him that 40 consecutive miles of said railroad and telegraph line have been completed and equipped in all respects as required by this act, then, upon certificate of said commissioners to that effect, patents shall issue conveying the right and title to said lands, to said company, on each side of the road as far as the same is completed, to the amount aforesaid, and patents shall in like manner issue, as each 40 miles of said railroad and telegraph line are completed, upon certificate of said commissioners. Any vacancies occurring in said Board of Commissioners by death, resignation, or otherwise, shall be filled by the President of the United States, provided, however, that such commissioners shall be appointed by the President of the United States, unless there shall be presented to him a statement, verified on oath by the President of said company, that such 40 miles have been completed, in the manner required by this act, and setting forth with certainty the points where such 40 miles begin, and where the same end, which oath shall be taken before a judge of a court of record. Section 5. And be it further enacted that, for the purposes herein mentioned, the Secretary of the Treasury shall, upon the certificate in writing of said commissioners of the completion and equipment of 40 consecutive miles of said railroad and telegraph, in accordance with the provisions of this act, issue to said company bonds of the United States of $1,000 each, payable in 30 years after date, bearing 6% per annum interest, said interest payable semi-annually, which interest may be paid in United States Treasury notes, or any other money or currency which the United States have, or shall declare lawful money, and a legal tender, to the amount of 16 of said bonds per mile for such section of 40 miles, and to secure the repayment to the United States, as hereinafter provided, of the amount of said bonds so issued and delivered to said company, together with all interest thereon which shall have been paid by the United States. The issue of said bonds and delivery to the company shall ipso facto constitute a first mortgage on the whole line of the railroad and telegraph, together with the rolling stock, fixtures, and property of every kind and description, and in consideration of which said bonds may be issued, and on the refusal or failure of said company to redeem said bonds, or any part of them, when required so to do by the Secretary of the Treasury, in accordance with the provisions of this act, the said road, with all the rights, functions, immunities, and appertences thereunto belonging, and also all lands granted to the said company by the United States, which, at the time of said default, shall remain in the ownership of the said company, may be taken possession of by the Secretary of the Treasury, for the use and benefit of the United States, provided the section shall not apply to that part of any road now constructed. Section 6. And be it further enacted, that the grants aforesaid are made upon condition that said company shall pay said bonds at maturity, and shall keep said railroad and telegraph line in repair and use, and shall at all times transmit dispatches over said telegraph line, and transport mails, troops, and munitions of war, supplies, and public storage upon said railroad for the government, whenever required to do so by any department thereof, and that the government shall at all times have the preference in their use of the same for all the purposes aforesaid, at fair and reasonable rates of compensation, not to exceed the amounts paid by private parties for the same kind of service, wink, and all compensation for services rendered for the government shall be applied to the payment of said bonds and interest until the whole amount is fully paid. Said company may also pay the United States, wholly or in part, in the same or other bonds, treasury notes, or other evidences of debt against the United States, to be allowed at par, and after said road is completed, until said bonds and interest are paid, at least 5% of the net earnings of said road hall also be annually applied to the payment thereof. Section 7. And be it further enacted, that said company shall file their assent to this act, under the seal of said company, in the Department of the Interior, within 1 year after the passage of this act, and shall complete said railroad and telegraph from the point of beginning, as herein provided, to the western boundary of Nevada Territory, before the 1st day of July, 1874, provided that within 2 years after the passage of this act said company shall designate the general route of said road, as near as may be, and shall file a map of the same in the Department of the Interior, whereupon the Secretary of the Interior shall cause the lands within 15 miles of said designated route, or routes to be withdrawn from preemption, private entry, and sale, and when any portion of said route shall be finally located, the Secretary of the Interior shall cause the said lands herein before granted to be surveyed and set off as fast as may be necessary for the purposes herein named, provided that, in fixing the point of connection of the main trunk with the eastern connections, it shall be fixed at the most practicable point for the construction of the Iowa and Missouri branches, as hereinafter provided. Section 8. And be it further enacted, that the line of said railroad and telegraph shall commence at a point on the 100th meridian of a longitude west from Greenwich, between the south margin of the valley of the Republican River and the north margin of the valley of the Platte River, in the territory of Nebraska, at a point to be fixed by the President of the United States, after actual surveys, thence running westerly upon the most direct, central, and practicable route through the territories of the United States. The western boundary of the territory of Nevada, there to meet and connect with the line of the Central Pacific Railroad Company of California. Section 9. And be it further enacted, that the Leavenworth, Pawnee, and Western Railroad Company of Kansas are hereby authorized to construct a railroad and telegraph line from the Missouri River, at the mouth of the Kansas River, on the south side thereof, so as to connect with the Pacific Railroad of Missouri, to the aforesaid point, on the 100th meridian of longitude west from Greenwich, as herein provided, upon the same terms and conditions in all respects as are provided in this act, for the construction of the railroad and telegraph line first mentioned, and to meet and connect with the same at the meridian of longitude aforesaid, and in case the general route or line of road from the Missouri River to the Rocky Mountains should be so located as to require a departure northwardly from the proposed line of said Kansas Railroad, before it reaches the meridian of longitude aforesaid, the location of said Kansas road shall be made so as to conform thereto, and said railroad through Kansas shall be so located between the mouth of the Kansas River, as aforesaid, and the aforesaid point, on the 100th meridian of longitude, that the several railroads from Missouri and Iowa, herein authorized to connect with the same, can make connection within the limits prescribed in this act, provided the same can be done without deviating from the general direction of the whole line to the Pacific coast. The route in Kansas, west of the meridian of Fort Riley, to the aforesaid point, on the 100th meridian of longitude, to be subject to the approval of the President of the United States, and to be determined by him on actual survey. And said Kansas Company may proceed to build said railroad to the aforesaid point, on the 100th meridian of longitude west from Greenwich, in the territory of Nebraska. The Central Pacific Railroad Company of California, a corporation existing under the laws of the state of California, are hereby authorized to construct a railroad and telegraph line from the Pacific coast, at or near San Francisco, or the navigable waters of the Sacramento River, to the eastern boundary of California, upon the same terms and conditions, in all respects, as are contained in this act, for the construction of said railroad and telegraph line first mentioned, and to meet and connect with the first mentioned railroad and telegraph line, on the eastern boundary of California. Each of said companies shall file their acceptance of the conditions of this act in the Department of the Interior within 6 months after the passage of this act.